"Get out of my neighborhood!" she screamed at me. A retired FBI agent, standing in my own driveway, in front of my own home, in front of my 2 kids. And behind her stood her husband, a uniformed police officer, hand resting on his holster, ready to back up every single word she said. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just an HOA dispute. This was a criminal organization hiding behind a clipboard and a badge, and I was about to dismantle it from the inside out. My name is Miles Dalton. For 15 years, I infiltrated some of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the United States. Drug cartels in Miami, organized crime rings in Chicago, money laundering networks that stretched across 3 continents. I'd sat across tables from people who could have had me killed with a single phone call. I'd worn wires into rooms where one wrong word meant a bullet. I had stared down genuine evil and walked away every single time. So when I finally retired, I thought the hardest part of my life was behind me. My wife Elena, a pediatric nurse who had spent 15 years lying awake at night wondering whether I was coming home, finally convinced me to hang it all up, to find something quieter, something safer, something normal. We found Willowbrook Estates. It was exactly what it sounds like. Manicured lawns that smelled like fresh-cut St. Augustine grass on Saturday mornings. The sound of sprinklers hitting concrete sidewalks in that slow, rhythmic pattern that just screams safe American suburbia. Identical brick mailboxes lined the streets like little soldiers, every garage door painted regulation beige. It was boring and predictable and absolutely perfect. We bought a modest 1,800-square-foot ranch house, and for the first time in 15 years, I slept without a weapon under my pillow. Our kids, Sophie, who was 12, and Jake, who was 9, finally had the childhood we had always promised them. A neighborhood with a playground, a tennis court, and a community pool that sparkled so blue in the Texas sun, it looked like something out of a resort brochure. I thought the biggest threat here would be a noise complaint or a parking ticket. I was wrong. On day 3 after we moved in, I was unloading boxes from my work truck when a white Mercedes SUV with a vanity plate that read HOA 1 came screeching into my driveway like it was responding to a 5-alarm fire. Out stepped a woman in designer workout clothes, holding a clipboard like it was a weapon, blonde hair that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments, and a smile so sharp and artificial it could have been cut from plastic. "Welcome to Willowbrook," she announced, not waiting for me to speak. "I'm Constance Blackwood, HOA President. We have a problem." She slapped a thick, official-looking violation notice into my hand, printed on cardstock so heavy it probably cost $50 to produce. Commercial vehicles prohibited in residential driveways. Section 4.7.3. $200 per day until compliance. Now, I want you to understand something. I have sat across from cartel bosses who were more polite than this woman. I have negotiated with people who had the power to end my life, and not one of them opened with that kind of arrogance. But I stayed calm. I smiled, and I looked past her at something sitting in her own driveway that I found extremely interesting. A police patrol car, just parked there, permanently, like it belonged. "Is that your husband's cruiser?" I asked. Her smile turned predatory. "Officer Blackwood works very hard keeping undesirable elements out of our community. Some vehicles enhance security." She looked at my work truck like it was a toxic waste dump. "Others attract the wrong kind of people." I understood the message immediately. Their police car belonged. My truck didn't. Their family was welcome. Mine was barely tolerated. She wasn't talking about vehicles at all. She never was. That should have been the end of it. A rude welcome, an irritating fine, and a neighbor I would learn to avoid. But Constance Blackwood didn't know how to stop while she was ahead, and that personality flaw was going to cost her everything. That weekend, Eleanor and I let the kids explore the neighborhood for the first time. Sophie and Jake came running back to the house breathless with excitement. "Dad, the pool is huge. There's a diving board. Mum, can we go tomorrow?" Eleanor smiled for the first time in what felt like months. A real smile, relaxed and full of hope. "That sounds perfect," she said. So the next afternoon, we headed to the pool with our new HOA access cards, the kids practically vibrating out of their skin with excitement. The smell of chlorine and sunscreen, families spread out on lounge chairs, kids laughing, someone's dad doing a terrible backstroke. This was it. This was the suburban dream we had worked so hard to find. Constance appeared like a storm cloud walking on 2 designer-sandaled feet. "Excuse me," she called out, cutting across the pool deck toward us with the focused energy of a heat-seeking missile. "Pool access for new residents is currently under review. Background verification process. I'll need you to surrender those access cards pending approval." My children's faces fell like something had been ripped out of them. Around us, other families pretended not to notice, going quiet and still, holding their breath, looking away. Sophie, 12 years old, looked up at me with confusion and hurt in her eyes, and something about that look activated every protective instinct I had ever developed across 15 years of working the most dangerous assignments in federal law enforcement. This was not about rules. I knew it immediately. I had spent a career learning to recognize the difference between legitimate authority and the performance of authority. Constance was performing. She was showing power because she could, and she had just made the single worst decision of her life. My kids didn't swim that day, but I went home and started reading. See, here's something I learned from 15 years chasing some of the most sophisticated criminals in America. Before you move on a target, you do your homework. You understand the structure. You map the organization. You know the rules better than they do, because when the moment comes, knowledge is the weapon that wins. I spent that evening going through every page of the HOA covenant, the governing documents, the bylaws, the Texas Property Code. I cross-referenced everything. I took notes. I flagged violations, because what Constance didn't know about me, what she couldn't have known, was that the man she had just picked a fight with had spent a career turning that exact kind of preparation into federal convictions. The next morning at 7 o'clock sharp, I was making coffee when a patrol car screeched into my driveway with all the subtlety of a SWAT raid, tires grinding against the gravel, blue and red light briefly strobing before they were cut. Officer Brent Blackwood climbed out like he was responding to an armed robbery. 6'2", buzz cut going gray, 2 decades of authority complex packed into a uniform that had seen better days. His hand rested on his service weapon as he approached the front door. Textbook intimidation posture. I had seen it in cities from Newark to Los Angeles. I opened the door in my bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, playing completely relaxed suburban dad. "Morning, officer. Everything okay?" "Mr. Dalton?" he barked, flipping open a notepad like he was conducting a murder investigation. "Received a complaint about criminal trespassing on HOA property. I need you to surrender your pool access cards and amenity keys. Right now." I want you to picture this moment. A sworn police officer in full uniform at 7 in the morning standing in a private citizen's driveway, demanding that he surrender access to amenities that his HOA dues legally entitle him to on behalf of that officer's own wife, and he had his hand on his gun while he said it. I stayed completely calm, because I had been here before, just never in a bathrobe. "Officer," I said pleasantly, pulling out my phone and pressing record. "What's the incident report number for this complaint?" His face tightened, that small, involuntary, micro-expression that I had spent years training myself to notice. He hadn't expected that question. Corrupt officials never do. They are used to people folding immediately. "This is official HOA business," he snapped. "Then why are you here in uniform? Threatening arrest?" He blinked, shifted his weight, couldn't hold eye contact. Every tell I had ever cataloged in an interrogation room, right there on my front porch. I disappeared inside for 30 seconds and came back with our property deed and the full HOA covenant documents. I spread them out on my doorstep with the same careful precision I had used arranging evidence at crime scenes. "Officer Blackwood," I said, pointing to the relevant sections. "Pool access is a permanent property right attached to this deed. The HOA cannot revoke ownership privileges without due process hearings and written notice, both of which must happen before, not after, any access is restricted." He actually stumbled backward. He had come here expecting tears, compliance, maybe a slammed door. He had not come prepared for a man who knew the law better than he did. "The HOA board meets Thursday," he managed. "This will be resolved then." But he couldn't leave without one final power move. He leaned close enough that I could smell the stale cigarette smoke on his jacket. "Mr. Dalton, I'd be real careful about causing trouble around here. We take community safety very seriously. Step out of line and I will find a reason to arrest you." I watched him drive away and stood there on my front porch for a long moment, letting everything settle. Because what had just happened wasn't just intimidation, it was a crime. A sworn officer of the law had just used his badge to enforce a personal dispute on behalf of his own wife. That is textbook deprivation of rights under color of law. I had helped prosecute federal cases built on exactly that charge. And I knew, standing there in my bathrobe, holding a coffee mug and a property deed, that this was only the beginning. That evening, I started working the neighborhood the way I had always worked a case. Quietly, methodically, building a map of the power structure. Who was afraid? Who was angry? Who had been targeted before me? Mrs. Dorothy Brighton was watering her rose garden when I walked by. Mid-60s, retired schoolteacher, the kind of woman whose careful politeness told you she had learned long ago to keep her head down. "Beautiful garden," I said. We started talking, and almost immediately I noticed something. Every few sentences, her eyes flicked toward the Blackwood house, like she was checking to make sure no one was watching. I mentioned our situation at the pool. Her face went pale. "The Hendersons," she whispered after a pause. "Young couple. They lived here 2 years. Started asking questions about HOA finances at a board meeting. 2 weeks later, Officer Blackwood started doing wellness checks at their house, late at night. Complaints about noise that nobody else heard, patio furniture violations, holiday decoration complaints." She gripped her garden hose so tightly her knuckles went white. "They moved to Cedar Park last spring." She pointed down the street toward a corner house. "Jim Santos runs the auto shop on Maple. Same thing happened to him. Code enforcement citations about his backyard shed. Police visits. He won't even talk about it anymore. He's just quiet now." I walked home slowly, letting the pattern crystallize. Constance selected the targets. Brent provided the badge-powered intimidation. Anyone who questioned HOA finances or pushed back on board decisions got systematically harassed until they shut up or left. It was elegant in its brutality, and it had been working for at least 2 years. Most people facing that kind of organized police intimidation would cut their losses, pack their bags, find a different neighborhood. That is exactly what the Blackwoods were counting on. They had picked the wrong family. Thursday night arrived with the smell of stale coffee and institutional floor cleaner. The community center felt less like a neighborhood meeting and more like a kangaroo court that had already decided on the verdict. The usual 30 residents had mysteriously shrunk to 12 people, and half of them were wearing campaign buttons that read, "Blackwood for Safety." Constance sat at the head table like a queen holding court, flanked by her hand-picked board members. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, giving everyone that particular guilty pallor. She banged her gavel and announced an emergency session to address serious security concerns brought to the attention of local law enforcement. The security concern, apparently, was me. Mr. Dalton has been observed threatening a police officer and violating multiple community standards. For the safety of our families, I am proposing the immediate revocation of all amenity access, pending a comprehensive behavioral assessment. I was sitting in the back row with a notepad, watching the performance. Corrupt organizations always rush their biggest power grabs. They know that if people have time to think, they start asking inconvenient questions. A board member named Patricia Mills raised her hand. "Don't we need proper notice for emergency powers?" Constance's smile could have frozen fire. Section 12.4 allows immediate action when community safety is threatened. I stood up. "Point of order. What is the specific nature of these alleged threats? You recorded a police officer without consent." Another board member shot back. I looked at him calmly. "Texas is a one-party consent state. Recording police interactions is constitutionally protected." There was a long, shuffling silence. Nobody had done their homework. Nobody except me. "The motion passes 4-1, Constance announced, barely pausing for anyone to actually vote. I looked around the room. 5 board members present. I raised my hand again. "Constance, you don't have a quorum. Emergency votes require 7 members under your own bylaws. Section 8.3. Her face went the color of a fire engine. "Also," I continued pleasantly, "background check requirements for community pool access violate Texas Property Code, Section 202.004. Discriminatory access restrictions based on residency duration are not legally enforceable." The room shifted. A few neighbors who had been staring at their laps actually looked up. Something was different tonight. Someone was fighting back, and they weren't losing. The meeting collapsed into awkward adjournment. But as people filed out, a man named Tyler Brooks from Pine Street hung back until the room cleared. He approached me carefully, like someone checking the weather before stepping outside. "That recording law thing you mentioned," he said quietly. "My wife and I have some videos you might want to see." The next morning, Tyler and his wife Madison came to our house with evidence that made my FBI instincts come alive. Crystal clear security footage of Officer Blackwood's late-night so-called wellness checks. Flashlight beams sweeping through neighbors' windows at 11, midnight, 1 in the morning. Him photographing license plates in the dark. Testing door handles on houses where the lights were off. Circling properties on foot while residents slept, unaware they were being surveilled by the man sworn to protect them. "He told us neighbors had reported suspicious activity," Madison said, her voice shaking. But we had just asked questions about pool maintenance expenses at the last board meeting. There it was, the pattern made whole. This was not random harassment. This was systematic witness intimidation. Ask about the money, get the midnight visits. Question the board, get the code enforcement citations. Push too hard and you end up like the Hendersons, gone. But then Madison said something that changed everything. She worked at First National Bank, and she had processed some HOA checks that had never sat right with her. She spread printed bank records across my kitchen table. Her hands were trembling slightly as she smoothed them flat. Pool maintenance contract, $8,000 per month, paid to a company called Maintenance Solutions LLC. Except when she looked up the company, the registration date was 3 weeks after Constance Blackwood became HOA president. The business address was a UPS mailbox. No employees, no equipment, no office, no actual services of any kind. My blood went cold in the way it only does when something snaps into focus. Shell companies. That was the bread and butter of every financial crime I had ever investigated. Somebody was routing HOA funds through fake vendors and pocketing the difference. I had seen this exact structure a dozen times, just never in a subdivision with HOA1 vanity plates. I spent the next several hours doing what I had spent 15 years doing, following the money. I cross-referenced the bank statements with public records, state business registrations, property filings, corporate documents. The math was brutally simple. Inflate legitimate expenses by 300%, route the overpayment to a shell company, collect the cash, and if anyone asks questions, send your husband in uniform to their house at midnight. Total estimated theft over 18 months, $73,000. And on the fraudulent checks, right there in blue ink, 2 signatures, Constance Blackwood and Officer Brent Blackwood. He was not just the muscle, he was a co-conspirator, an active participant in federal wire fraud. I sat back in my chair and let that land. Then I started planning. The following week, Constance declared total war. It started Monday morning. Elena came through the front door with a stack of violation notices thick enough to use as a doorstop. 3 city inspectors had visited our property, all within a 90-minute window, all while Elena and I were both at work. Grass height 1/4 inch over regulation, mailbox at an improper angle, garbage can visible from the street, $500 in fines. The timestamps were military in their precision. 9:15, 9:30, 9:45. Coordinated, deliberate. Designed to bleed us financially while we weren't home to challenge the measurements. Sophie looked up from her cereal that morning with 12-year-old confusion clouding her eyes. "Mom, why is everyone being mean to us? Did we do something wrong?" That question hit me somewhere deep. My daughter was asking why adults were targeting her family. My daughter, who had done nothing except move into a new neighborhood and want to swim in a pool. This ends now. That evening, I deployed the kind of surveillance setup I had used tracking cartel operations in El Paso. Military-grade cameras with infrared capability, covering 12 different angles of the property. I installed them myself after dark, quietly, professionally, and then I watched. Brent's patrol car cruised past our house 4 times in 3 hours that night, well outside any normal patrol pattern. Each pass accompanied by a searchlight sweeping our property like we were escaped convicts. At 11:15, he parked at the corner and walked to our mailbox with a flashlight, photographing our house numbers and testing mailbox stability in the dark. He did not notice the cameras. They never do. While I was building my surveillance file, Elena found the smoking gun hiding in plain sight. She had been methodically going through 6 months of posts in the neighborhood's private Facebook group, and the pattern that emerged was devastating in its clarity. The Hendersons had questioned a $15,000 emergency roof repair. 2 weeks later, police complaints nobody else had reported. Jim Santos had asked for competitive bidding on maintenance contracts. The following month, code enforcement arrived about cars in his driveway. Dorothy Brighton had suggested a financial audit at a board meeting. 3 days later, her bird feeders became a pest violation. Question the money. Get harassed until you quit or leave. It was a protection racket hiding behind HOA bylaws and a police badge. And it had worked on every family they had ever targeted. Until now. Tyler called me the next afternoon with a voice that was barely above a whisper. "Madison found the smoking gun," he said. "She has bank statements showing Constance writing checks to herself through the shell companies. We're talking about federal embezzlement. Clear, documented, provable. That evening, they brought everything over. The full picture: $73,000 in stolen funds, fraudulent invoices, shell company documentation, every check co-signed by both Blackwoods. The kind of clean paper trail evidence that makes federal prosecutors look forward to coming to work in the morning. I was still photographing the documents when my security system pinged motion at the front of the house. I looked at the monitor. Brent approaching the front door with a confidence that said he thought he was still in control. Constance right behind him, phone out, ready to record her husband flexing his badge one more time. I opened the door before he even knocked. "Evening, Officer Blackwood. I assume you're here about the anonymous complaints." His swagger faltered, just slightly, but I caught it. "What complaints?" "The ones that triggered today's coordinated inspection blitz," I said pleasantly, holding up the citation stack. Interesting timing, all scheduled during work hours when we couldn't witness the measurements being taken. Behind him, Constance's smile wavered. "Since you're here officially," I continued, "I'd like to report some crimes: financial fraud, conspiracy to commit embezzlement, abuse of authority under color of law." Brent's face went white. "You can't prove anything," he said, and the fear behind those 4 words told me everything I needed to know about whether they believed it themselves. I held up the evidence folder. "Actually, I can. Bank records, fraudulent invoices, shell company documentation, and co-signed checks with both your names on them. Everything a federal prosecutor needs to file conspiracy charges." Constance's phone hit the concrete. The sound of it cracking against the driveway was the sound of their world beginning to fracture. "Oh, and Officer Blackwood," I added as they began backing toward their house. "My security system has been recording every late-night visit, high-definition infrared footage, time-stamped, courtroom quality. The FBI has always loved that kind of evidence." They retreated. I watched them go, and then I went back inside and made a phone call. The hardest work of the next week was not gathering evidence. It was what I found buried in the original development agreement at 2 in the morning. On page 47, in language so dense that nobody had ever bothered to read it. Emergency management transfer. In the event of financial misconduct, fraud, or breach of fiduciary duty by the HOA board, Pinnacle Properties LLC retains permanent easement rights to assume immediate management control of all common areas and community governance. I read it 3 times. Then I sat very still for a long moment. The original developer had built an ejector seat into the community's legal foundation, a fail-safe designed specifically for this exact kind of board corruption. And it had been sitting there, untouched, for 6 years. I looked up Pinnacle Properties, Harrison Webb, 61 years old, a developer who had lost $2.3 million when the subdivision's original board botched a construction defect lawsuit in 2018. A man with every reason to want a mechanism for removing corrupt boards, and apparently the legal foresight to build one. I called him the next morning expecting voicemail. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Dalton," he said, after I explained everything in 2 minutes flat, "I have been waiting 6 years for someone to find that clause." Webb had been quietly monitoring HOA finances since day one, watching, waiting for exactly this kind of misconduct. His legal team had been polishing the emergency transfer process since 2019. He told me he had a file folder of resident complaints thicker than a phone book. People, too, frightened to go directly to the board, so they had called corporate instead. The Hendersons, the Santos family, Dorothy Brighton, the Brooks family. All of them had called. All of them had been documented. "Give me bulletproof evidence," he said, "and corporate management takes over in 2 weeks." That afternoon, Webb arrived in a Tesla looking exactly like Central Casting's idea of a successful developer. Tailored suit, titanium watch, and the quiet confidence of a man who actually owns things instead of just pretending to. His corporate attorney and his forensic accountant spread my evidence across the dining room table and spent 40 minutes going through every document with surgical precision. 73,000 in provable embezzlement, his attorney said. Shell companies, fraudulent invoices, spousal conspiracy. The financial misconduct threshold is clearly exceeded. Emergency transfer paperwork can be filed tomorrow. Webb looked at me. "Mr. Dalton, you are not their first victim, but you are going to be their last." He outlined the plan. Monday night, a community meeting, full corporate presentation of the financial crimes, live, in front of every resident, with media present. Immediate management transfer activated in real time, before witnesses and cameras. No backroom deals, no quiet settlements. Public accountability, maximum exposure. I spent the weekend preparing like I was running a federal operation. Because I was. Surveillance equipment installed throughout the community center. Security protocols coordinated with Webb's team. Channel 7 news anchor Amanda Cross confirmed for live coverage. Tyler and Madison rehearsing their witness testimony at my kitchen table while I coached them the same way I had coached witnesses in organized crime prosecutions. Keep it simple. Numbers convict, but fear is what people remember. Talk about being afraid in your own neighborhood. Talk about what it felt like to hear a police flashlight sweeping your windows at midnight. Dorothy Brighton showed up at my door Sunday evening with a manila folder thick enough to use as a weapon. "Mr. Dalton," she said quietly, "I have documented every incident for 2 years. Every harassment visit, every selective enforcement citation, every family that moved away. I was too scared to ever do anything with it." She paused. "But I'm not scared anymore." I told her she might be our most important witness. Monday evening, 6:30. The community center filled beyond capacity, with residents who had been invisible for months, sensing somehow that tonight was different. The air had that particular electric quality of a room where something long overdue is about to finally happen. Constance and Brent arrived at 6:45. Constance clutching her gavel like a drowning woman gripping driftwood. Brent positioning himself near the back exit, hand near his weapon, doing the intimidation choreography that had always worked before. They had absolutely no idea what was about to happen. Constance called the meeting to order, announced some routine matters, and reached for the gavel. That is when Webb stood up from the front row, his three-piece suit and corporate documents cutting through the suburban theater like a blade. "Actually, Constance, we have some urgent business to address first." Her smile faltered for exactly 2 seconds before snapping back into place. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "Harrison Webb, Pinnacle Properties. I believe you're familiar with the Emergency Management Easement Clause in the original development agreement." The color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug. Around the room, residents leaned forward. Nobody had heard of any easement clause, but the words emergency management sounded very promising to people who had been living under HOA tyranny for 2 years. "I'm not sure what you're referring to," Constance said, her voice losing its authority for the first time. Webb nodded to the forensic accountant, who stood and turned to face the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here tonight because your HOA board has embezzled over $73,000 through fraudulent contracts and shell companies." The room erupted. Gasps, angry mutters, chairs scraping linoleum, people turning to stare at Constance like she had grown a second head. The smell of shock and anger and 2 years of suppressed outrage finally finding an exit. The projector lit up the wall. Bank statements in high-definition clarity. Checks made out to Maintenance Solutions LLC, $8,000 per month. Pool maintenance that cost more than most people's mortgages. The forensic accountant walked the room through every transaction with surgical precision. Shell Company incorporated 3 weeks after Constance became president. Business address, a UPS mailbox. No employees, no equipment, no services. And there on the cosigner line, Officer Brent Blackwood's signature, 47 times. Constance played her last card. "Officer Blackwood!" she screamed, pointing into the crowd. "These people are trespassing on HOA property. I want them arrested for disrupting official business." Brent stepped forward, hand on his weapon. "Everyone needs to disperse immediately. You are interfering with official HOA governance." The room went quiet. 2 decades of instinctive deference to police authority kicking in. Some residents actually started reaching for their things, but I stayed seated, phone recording, completely calm, because I had been waiting for exactly this moment. Tyler Brooks stood up from the middle of the room, evidence folder in his shaking hands, voice steady. "Officer Blackwood, your signature is on those fraudulent checks. You are not law enforcement tonight. You are a co-conspirator." Brent's face cycled through panic. "You're interfering with a police investigation." "What investigation?" Amanda Cross called from the media section, her camera crew capturing everything. "We contacted your department. There is no active investigation on file." That is when Constance completely came apart. She stood up from her chair and pointed at the crowd like a dictator addressing a rebellion. "You people do not understand. We have worked for years to maintain standards. We have protected property values. We have kept out the undesirable elements." The room went very still, because every person in that room heard exactly what those words meant, and the racist undertone of them hung in the air like smoke, visible and undeniable, finally said out loud for everyone to witness. And then, from the back of the room, a voice. Cold, professional, carrying 15 years of authority like a physical weight. "Officer Blackwood, FBI Special Agent Lisa Rodriguez walked through the entrance, flanked by two federal agents in suits that announced themselves before she said another word. She held up her credentials and walked toward Brent with the measured calm of someone who had done this 1,000 times. You are being investigated for deprivation of rights under color of law, conspiracy to commit fraud, and abuse of authority. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Brent's hand fell away from his weapon. His face went through every stage of criminal panic. His entire career, his pension, his freedom, every choice he had made for 20 years, condensed into this single moment. Constance made her final catastrophic mistake. She stood on her chair and screamed at the federal agents, called them terrorists, federal terrorists, demanding to know who had started this investigation, pointing wildly around the room, and then she turned and pointed at me. "You!" she screamed. "You have been nothing but trouble since day one. You've destroyed everything we built here." I stood up slowly. 15 years of training in the perfect use of silence. Let the moment breathe. Then I spoke quietly enough that the whole room had to lean in to hear me. "Constance, you made one critical mistake when you decided to target my family." I paused. Just one beat. "My name is Agent Miles Dalton, FBI Financial Crimes Unit, retired. For the past 3 weeks, I have been conducting a preliminary federal investigation into systematic corruption, civil rights violations, and organized harassment in this community. Every police visit, every harassment citation, every fraudulent transaction, documented, preserved, forwarded to federal prosecutors." The gasps from neighbors sounded like a wave breaking. Several people turned to look at me like they were seeing me for the first time, like they were suddenly understanding everything about the past 3 weeks. Wire fraud, conspiracy, deprivation of rights under color of law. These charges carry minimum 15-year federal sentences. Agent Rodriguez stepped forward with handcuffs. Constance collapsed into her chair, the fight draining out of her completely. 24 months of comfortable corruption, 200 stolen checks, 73,000 stolen dollars, dozens of terrorized families, all of it collapsing into a single pair of handcuffs clicking shut in a fluorescent-lit community center while a news camera captured every frame. As the agents escorted the Blackwoods toward the exit, Constance made one last attempt. "You will regret this," she called out over her shoulder. "Property values will collapse. Crime will skyrocket. You need us." I let her get almost to the door. Then I said it clearly, calmly, for every person in that room and every camera in it. "Constance, the only crime problem this neighborhood ever had was you and your husband." The applause started with Dorothy Brighton, 2 hands clapping, slow and deliberate. Then Tyler Brooks joined, then Jim Santos, who stood up to do it. And then the entire room, people who had been silent for 2 years, finally finding their voices all at once. Through the community center windows, I watched the patrol car that had terrorized my family driving away with its owner in the back seat. 6 months later, I am sitting by the community pool. The same pool my kids were denied access to on their second day in this neighborhood. Sophie cannonballs off the diving board and comes up laughing, shaking water out of her hair. Jake is attempting some kind of underwater handstand near the steps. Elena is in a lounge chair with her eyes closed and the expression of a woman who is finally completely relaxed. The neighborhood has transformed in ways I honestly did not fully anticipate. Webb's corporate management delivered everything it promised. Monthly financial reports posted online for every resident to review. Board meetings run with actual democratic procedure. When you eliminate embezzlement and run honest accounting, HOA fees drop. Ours dropped 30%. Common areas got better maintained, not worse. Professional management, it turns out, is simply better than personal dictatorship. The federal prosecution moved efficiently. Constance pleaded guilty to 18 counts of fraud and embezzlement and received 8 years in federal prison. Brent received 12 years for conspiracy and deprivation of rights. Federal judges, it appears, are not sympathetic to police officers who weaponize their badges against innocent families in exchange for access to stolen HOA funds. The community recovered every stolen dollar plus federal damages totaling $150,000. Webb did something with that money that I did not expect and that I think about more than almost anything else from this entire experience. He donated the entire settlement to establish a scholarship fund, $25,000 annually, awarded to local students studying criminal justice, public administration, or civil rights law. He named it the Blackwood Corruption Memorial Scholarship Fund. "Let their crimes fund the next generation of people who will fight corruption," he told me. I thought about that for a long time. I still do. Dorothy Brighton ran for HOA President and won by the largest margin in the subdivision's history. Her first official act was establishing monthly coffee with neighbors sessions where residents could raise concerns without fear of retaliation. Her second was installing security cameras around every common area. Her third was planting flowers along the entrance that everybody picks their own favorites for. No committee approval required. Tyler and Madison Brooks became unlikely local heroes. Their banking expertise helped 2 other communities expose similar embezzlement schemes. Madison eventually left her corporate position to become a forensic accountant, specializing in HOA financial crimes. Suburban corruption, she told me with a grim laugh, turns out to be a growth industry. Jim Santos expanded his auto shop and hired 3 employees, including 2 neighbors who had been effectively blacklisted by the Blackwoods for asking too many questions. The backyard shed that had generated so much code enforcement harassment now houses a community tool library where neighbors borrow equipment for home projects. The first tool he put in it was a lawnmower. Amanda Cross won a regional journalism award for her investigative series on suburban corruption. Her follow-up reports helped expose similar schemes in 4 other Texas communities. The story that started with my children being turned away from a swimming pool became a statewide conversation about HOA transparency and the systems of accountability that prevent private organizations from becoming vehicles for abuse. The City Council passed new ordinances, required financial audits for all HOAs above a certain size, mandatory resident oversight committees. Our case became a case study used in law enforcement academies across the state. The Blackwood House, seized as part of the federal asset forfeiture, is now a community garden. Tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, zucchini, herbs, enough produce that we supply our local food bank year-round. I think about that every time I walk past it. A place that was once the command center of a suburban extortion scheme, now growing food for people who need it. Democracy replacing dictatorship, 1 tomato at a time. For me personally, retirement has finally become what retirement is supposed to be. I consult occasionally with Webb's legal team, helping other communities identify and document the early warning signs of board corruption. 15 years of FBI experience, it turns out, translates remarkably well into suburban justice advocacy. The skills are the same. The stakes feel different now, better different. Most evenings I am at the pool or in the backyard or helping Jake with his homework or watching Sophie at soccer practice. Normal, boring, predictable suburban family life. The exact thing Elena and I came here for. Last week at the pool, a neighbor's kid asked Jake if our family had always lived here. Jake thought about it for a second and then said, "No, we just moved here, but we're not going anywhere." I watched him say it from across the pool deck and felt something settle in my chest. This is what America is supposed to feel like. Constitutional rights respected, corruption exposed, communities governed by consent instead of fear, people helping each other instead of surveilling each other, kids swimming in a pool without anyone demanding to know whether they belong there. My kids swim here every single day now, and nobody says a word.